Dr. Rachel Foster hunched over her desk in the forensic history department at Boston University. Examining a wedding photograph from 1913, the sepia-toned image showed a handsome couple in formal Edwardian attire. The bride in an elaborate white gown with cascading pearls, the groom standing proudly in morning dress, his left hand positioned prominently to display his wedding band. "Another donation for the medical jewelry archive?" asked Dr. Patel, peering over her shoulder. Rachel nodded. "From the Reynolds family collection. This one caught my attention because of the groom's unusual ring positioning, almost as if he's deliberately showcasing it. For 3 years, Rachel had built an archive of historical jewelry with medical or pharmaceutical purposes. She placed the photograph under her digital microscope and focused on the groom's hand. What she saw made her breath catch. "James, look at this," she said, stepping back. Dr. Patel adjusted the focus, then straightened with a puzzled expression. "And that can't be right. That's a poison ring design, Italian 16th century. See the hinged bezel? It's designed to open and dispense powder." "Exactly," Rachel said. "But this photograph is from 1913. Those designs weren't replicated until the Art Deco revival in the 1930s. This predates that by 2 decades. She flipped the photograph over. Reading the handwriting, Jonathan and Catherine Clark, née Reynolds, June 14th, 1913, Clark Pharmacy, Boston. A quick database search revealed basic information. Jonathan Clark had been a prominent Boston pharmacist who married into the wealthy Reynolds textile family. The notation about Catherine's death caught Rachel's attention. Deceased. December 1913, nervous fever, just 6 months after the wedding. Rachel felt academic curiosity blooming into something more urgent. A pharmacist with access to various compounds, wearing what appeared to be a poison ring, and a bride who died shortly after their wedding. "I need to see if there are more photographs from this family," she said, reaching for her phone. "And I want to track down Catherine Clark's medical records." Dr. Patel raised an eyebrow. "Thinking of expanding your research focus?" Rachel studied the groom's face in the photograph. Handsome, confident, with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. Something about this doesn't feel right. She had no way of knowing that the elegant ring had witnessed not 1 death, but 5. All members of the Reynolds family who stood between Jonathan Clark and one of Boston's largest fortunes. Nor could she have anticipated how her research would connect this century-old crime to one of America's most powerful political families. The next morning found Rachel at the Massachusetts Medical Historical Society, examining archived records of Dr. William Hammond, the Reynolds family physician in the early 1900s. Catherine Clark's file was extensive. Beginning in July 1913, just weeks after her wedding, she had experienced a constellation of symptoms: digestive distress, headaches, irritability, and progressively worsening weakness. By November, she was bedridden with what Dr. Hammond described as nervous decline complicated by gastric disturbances. Most telling was Hammond's November note: patient's hair beginning to fall out in patches, skin showing unusual pigmentation around fingernails and neck. Symptoms suggest possible arsenic exposure, though husband reports no household chemicals containing such compounds. The final entry, dated December 18th, 1913, stated, "Mrs. Catherine Clark succumbed to her illness at 3:17 a.m., husband present. Death certificate issued citing nervous fever as cause." The symptoms described were classic signs of chronic arsenic poisoning, a toxin readily available to a pharmacist in 1913 when arsenic compounds were used in numerous medications. Rachel's research became more disturbing when she examined broader Reynolds family records. Catherine's father, industrialist George Reynolds, had died in March 1914, just 3 months after his daughter, displaying remarkably similar symptoms. Her mother, Eleanor Reynolds, followed in July of that year, also after an extended illness with comparable manifestations. By September 1914, Catherine's only brother, Thomas Reynolds, was dead from gastric inflammation with nervous complications. By December, the final obstacle to the family fortune, Catherine's elderly Aunt Margaret, had also died following a short, mysterious illness. In less than 18 months, every member of the immediate Reynolds family had died, leaving Jonathan Clark, who had married into the family just before this devastating series of losses as the sole inheritor of a fortune worth approximately $25 million. 1914 currency. Rachel carefully photographed the relevant records, her mind racing. The symptoms described across all 5 cases were consistent with arsenic poisoning. The timing created a clear pattern leading to Jonathan Clark gaining control of the entire Reynolds fortune, and the ring in the wedding photograph, designed to conceal and dispense powder, provided a potential method of delivery. A pharmacist would have known precisely how to administer arsenic to mimic natural illness. As she left, Rachel received an email from the Reynolds estate executor. Additional family materials had been discovered in a sealed trunk in the attic, including diaries, correspondence, and financial records spanning 1910 through 1920. The Reynolds estate was an imposing Victorian mansion on Beacon Hill. The executor, Richard Blackwell, Met Rachel in the dusty attic where generations of family records had been stored. These materials haven't been examined in decades, he explained, indicating a leather trunk. Your interest in the Catherine Clark materials comes at an opportune time. Among formal documents, Rachel discovered a locked diary with Eleanor Reynolds embossed on the cover. A small key taped inside the trunk opened it, revealing the private thoughts of Catherine's mother. Early entries showed a proud mother delighting in her daughter's engagement to the ambitious and charming Jonathan Clark. By August, the tone changed dramatically. August 12, 1913. Catherine visited today, looking pale and distressed. She confided that she has been feeling unwell since returning from their honeymoon. Jonathan insists it is merely adjustment to married life and prescribes various tonics from his pharmacy. I am concerned by her yellowed complexion and the tremor in her hands. By November, Eleanor's entries revealed growing suspicion. November 18, 1913. I can no longer ignore my darkest fears. Catherine's condition mirrors precisely the arsenic poisoning cases described in Dr. Hamilton's medical text. I observed Jonathan administering her medicine personally. Today, I noticed him wearing a curious ring with what appeared to be a compartment. When I inquired, he quickly covered it and changed the subject. The final entries were heartbreaking. December 19, 1913. My beloved Catherine was buried today. Jonathan played the role of grieving husband perfectly, yet I saw no true sorrow in his eyes. George now admits there may be substance to my concerns, but says we must proceed carefully with any accusations. January 10, 1914. George has fallen ill with symptoms distressingly similar to Catherine's early decline. Jonathan has offered medications from his pharmacy, which George has wisely declined. We have changed household staff as a precaution, yet George's condition worsens. Eleanor's diary ended abruptly in February 1914. But the trunk contained another crucial document, an unsent letter from George Reynolds to his attorney. Should anything happen to me, I must place on record my grave concerns regarding my son-in-law. Eleanor and I have come to believe he may be responsible for Catherine's death through the deliberate administration of poison, likely arsenic. We have observed him using an unusual ring with a hidden compartment to introduce substances into food or drink. George had died before sending it, his modified will apparently never executed, as evidenced by records showing Jonathan Clark's assumption of control over the Reynolds assets throughout 1914. As Rachel prepared to leave, Blackwell mentioned, the current owner of Clark Pharmaceuticals is coming tomorrow. Senator Harold Clark, Jonathan Clark's great-grandson, the presidential candidate. Rachel's investigation led her to the Massachusetts College of Pharmacy, which maintained historical records from Boston-area pharmacies. Clark Pharmacy's business ledgers from 1910 and 1920 had been preserved in their collections. Clark Pharmacy was quite prominent, explained Dr. Martin Chen, the archivist. Jonathan Clark was known for compounding specialized medications and importing European pharmaceutical innovations. His business expanded dramatically after 1914, eventually growing into Clark Pharmaceuticals. The purchasing records revealed what Rachel had suspected. Between January 1913 and December 1914, the business had ordered substantial quantities of arsenic compounds, ostensibly for creating various medicinal preparations common in that era. More revealing were the prescription records. Beginning in June 1913, Jonathan had created personalized tonics for each Reynolds family member. The ledger listed them by name: Mrs. Catherine Clark's digestive tonic, Mr. George Reynolds' vitality preparation, and similar entries for Eleanor, Thomas, and Margaret Reynolds. These personalized preparations were common practice then, Dr. Chen explained. Were the specific ingredients typically documented? Rachel asked. Usually, yes. That was standard practice for inventory purposes. Yet the entries for the Reynolds family preparations contained no ingredient. Lists only notations that the formulas were personally compounded by J. Clark and kept in a private formulary. That formulary was not among the preserved records. However, Rachel discovered something equally valuable. Employment records showing a young assistant named Michael Sullivan who had worked for Clark from 1912 to 1915, then relocated to Chicago, rather suddenly. This lead took Rachel to Chicago's public records, where she discovered Sullivan had provided a sworn statement to a private investigator in 1919, claiming knowledge of improper pharmaceutical practices by his former employer. Sullivan's statement, preserved at the Chicago History Museum, was damning. I observed Mr. Clark creating unlabeled preparations using arsenic compounds. These were kept separate and administered personally to his wife's family. Most disturbing was the special ring Mr. Clark often wore, a reproduction of an antique design with a concealed compartment. I observed him using this ring to extract powder which he added to the Reynolds family preparations. The investigation had been abandoned when Sullivan died unexpectedly in early 1920, officially from pneumonia. Without their key witness, any case against the now wealthy and influential Jonathan Clark had collapsed. As Rachel gathered her materials, her phone displayed a news alert. Senator Harold Clark leads presidential polls. Photo showed a distinguished man with Jonathan Clark's eyes and smile that didn't quite reach them. The modern implications of Rachel's historical research hit with full force as she traced the Clark family's trajectory using the Reynolds textile money. Jonathan had expanded from a single pharmacy into manufacturing, creating Clark Pharmaceutical Company by 1920. Under his leadership, the company had grown rapidly, securing government contracts during both world wars. Jonathan had lived until 1965, long enough to see his company become a major pharmaceutical player, and his grandson, William Clark, elected to Congress. That political legacy had continued through generations, culminating in Senator Harold Clark, Jonathan's great-grandson, and the current CEO of Clark Pharmaceuticals before entering politics. His presidential campaign emphasized his business acumen and family tradition of healing and public service, a tradition built on arsenic and murder. Rachel debated her next steps carefully. As a historian, she was obligated to pursue truth, but she was acutely aware of the explosive nature of her findings. Accusing a presidential candidate of benefiting from his great-grandfather's murders would generate intense scrutiny of both Senator Clark and herself. She consulted her department chair, Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, sharing her research without initially revealing the Clark connection. "This is extraordinary work," Dr. Morgan said after reviewing the evidence. "A clear case of serial poisoning using a pharmacist's knowledge and an ingenious delivery method." "There's a modern complication," Rachel admitted. "The murderer's descendant is a prominent public figure." "How prominent?" "Presidential candidate prominent." Silence filled the office. "This creates significant ethical considerations. Historical truth matters, but so does its application." "What exactly are you planning?" "I've documented a historical crime," Rachel said. "I'm not suggesting the descendant bears responsibility. Still, a family fortune and political career built on murder seems relevant to public interest." "Proceed carefully," Dr. Morgan advised. "Ensure your research is bulletproof before taking any public position. And Rachel, powerful people protect themselves. Watch your step." That evening, Rachel created digital backups of her evidence stored in multiple secure locations. As she worked, an email notification appeared from Richard Blackwell. "Senator Clark expressed great interest in your research regarding his great-grandfather. He specifically asked about the wedding photograph and mentioned wanting to discuss your findings personally. Would you be available to meet with him tomorrow at the Reynolds estate?" Rachel stared at the screen. She had told Blackwell only that she was researching early 20th century medical jewelry. She had not mentioned finding evidence of murder or Jonathan Clark's poison ring. How had the senator known the specific focus of her research? Rachel's instincts about proceeding cautiously proved correct the following morning, when she arrived at her office to find it had been searched overnight. Nothing was obviously missing, but items on her desk had been slightly rearranged, and her file cabinet drawers weren't fully closed. Details? Her historian's eye for archival precision immediately detected. Campus security confirmed a routine maintenance check had been conducted in her building overnight, but no one should have entered individual offices. The security cameras had experienced a technical malfunction during the precise hours in question. "This isn't coincidence," Rachel told Dr. Patel after explaining the situation. "Someone wanted to see my research without leaving traces. You think it's connected to the Clark matter? Well, what else could it be? I've documented evidence that the Clark family fortune began with 5 murders. That's not the origin story a presidential candidate wants circulating." Her phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "Your research on historical pharmaceuticals sounds fascinating. Perhaps we could discuss it over coffee? I have information that might interest you." Michael Clark, Clark Pharmaceuticals Research Division. Another Clark family member, suddenly interested in her work. The coincidence stretched credulity. Rachel showed the message to Dr. Patel, who frowned. "They're closing ranks. The question is whether they're worried about political embarrassment from historical revelations, or if there's something more concerning at stake." "Like what?" "The Clark pharmaceutical fortune is worth billions. Their company has government contracts, international partnerships, and significant political influence. Even a historical scandal could impact stock prices and regulatory scrutiny." Rachel considered her options. Refusing contact might escalate the situation, while agreeing to meet could provide insight into exactly what the Clark family knew about her research. She replied carefully, "I'd be happy to discuss historical pharmaceutical practices, perhaps the university coffee shop tomorrow at 10 a.m. The response came immediately. "Perfect. I have particular interest in historical pharmaceutical dispensers, including jewelry. See you tomorrow." The specific mention of jewelry confirmed her suspicions. Somehow, the Clark family knew exactly what she had discovered. Rachel spent the evening creating a detailed timeline of her findings with supporting documentation. She emailed it to her personal attorney with instructions to release it to specific journalists and academic colleagues if she did not check in every 24 hours. As she prepared for bed, Rachel studied the wedding photograph once more. Catherine Reynolds' expression, which had initially seemed appropriately solemn, now appeared tinged with uncertainty, as if on some level, the young bride sensed the danger posed by the man beside her and his seemingly innocuous wedding ring. I'll make sure they know what he did to you, Rachel whispered to the long-dead woman. To all of you. The university coffee shop offered the perfect balance of privacy and public visibility for Rachel's meeting with Michael Clark. She arrived early, selecting a corner table with clear sightlines to all entrances. At precisely 10 a.m., a man in his mid-40s entered, tall, well-dressed, with the unmistakable Clark features. He spotted her immediately and approached with confident strides. Dr. Foster? Michael Clark. Thank you for meeting me. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced. I've been following your work on historical pharmaceutical devices with great interest. I wasn't aware my specialized research had reached beyond academic circles, Rachel replied, watching his expression carefully. The Clark family maintains deep connections to pharmaceutical history. I understand you've been examining a particular wedding photograph from 1913 featuring my great-grandfather. No pretense, then. Rachel appreciated the directness. Yes, I've been researching medical jewelry from that period. Your great-grandfather's ring caught my attention because it appeared to be a reproduction of a 16th century Italian design that wasn't commonly replicated until much later. Michael nodded. Jonathan Clark was fascinated by historical pharmaceutical devices. Family lore says he collected unusual dispensers and delivery systems. Including poison rings? Rachel asked bluntly. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. Historical devices had multiple purposes. Compartment rings could store medications for convenient access, or, for a pharmacist, systematically poisoning his wife's family to gain control of their fortune. Rachel countered. A brief silence followed before Michael responded. That's a remarkable assertion. Family history can be subject to multiple interpretations. But accusations of murder require extraordinary evidence. I have extraordinary evidence. Mr. Clark, medical records documenting classic arsenic poisoning symptoms in 5 Reynolds family members. Contemporary suspicions documented in Eleanor Reynolds' diary. An unsent letter from George Reynolds accusing your great-grandfather of poisoning. Pharmacy records showing access to arsenic. And sworn testimony from Michael Sullivan, your great-grandfather's assistant, describing how Jonathan Clark used a specialized ring to administer poison. Michael's composure faltered slightly. Historical documents can be misleading when viewed through a modern lens. Medical knowledge was limited in 1913. 5 healthy people dying in the same pattern within 18 months, all showing identical symptoms of arsenic poisoning, all with financial connections to your great-grandfather? That wasn't standard practice in any era. Michael leaned forward, lowering his voice. What exactly are you planning to do with this research? Publish it. Historical truth matters. You understand the implications for my family? For my uncle's campaign? For a company that employs thousands? I understand that your family's wealth and influence began with murder, Rachel replied evenly. How that affects your current circumstances isn't my primary concern as a historian. Michael produced a business card. The Clark Foundation is establishing a new historical research endowment. We'd be interested in funding your work, with a broader focus than just our family, of course. Rachel understood the implicit offer. I don't think our research interests align, Mr. Clark. That's unfortunate. He stood to leave, then paused. One last thing. We'd like to acquire the wedding photograph for our family archive. Name your price. It's not for sale. It's historical evidence. Something cold flickered in Michael's eyes. Evidence requires context, Dr. Foster. And context can change dramatically depending on who provides it. Consider your position carefully. Historical researchers should avoid becoming part of the history they study. The threat was thinly veiled but unmistakable. The Clark family knew exactly what she had discovered, recognized the threat it posed, and had attempted both bribery and intimidation to neutralize that threat. That evening, Rachel received a call from Richard Blackwell, the Reynolds estate executor. Dr. Foster, Senator Clark has formally requested all materials related to his great-grandparents as a matter of family heritage. This includes the wedding photograph you've been examining. On what legal grounds? Rachel asked. Those materials were donated to Boston University for research purposes. There's been a complication. The donation paperwork appears incomplete, a clerical error. Technically, ownership remains with the estate until proper transfer documentation is executed. Rachel understood immediately. The Clark family was using legal maneuvering to recover evidence of Jonathan's crimes. I've already completed substantial research with those materials, she said carefully. My findings are documented and secured. The senator has requested a meeting with you and the university's legal department tomorrow to discuss appropriate handling of potentially sensitive historical information. His attorneys will be present. Involving the university raised the stakes considerably. Rachel immediately called Dr. Morgan to explain the situation. They're escalating quickly, Dr. Morgan noted. That suggests your research has them genuinely concerned. What's the university's position likely to be? Rachel asked. Complicated? The university supports academic freedom, but also depends on donations and political goodwill. If the Clark family can create legitimate questions about ownership of research materials, the administration might feel compelled to proceed cautiously. After the call, Rachel made several critical decisions. First, she sent her complete research file to 3 trusted colleagues at different institutions. Second, she contacted a journalist friend at the Boston Globe, providing a general outline of her research without specific details. Finally, she secured the physical evidence, particularly the wedding photograph, in a safe deposit box accessible only to her. The following morning, Rachel arrived at the university's administration building to find an imposing contingent waiting. Senator Harold Clark himself, flanked by 3 attorneys, Richard Blackwell, the university's general counsel, and Dr. Morgan, who gave Rachel a subtle nod of support. Senator Clark rose to greet her, tall, distinguished, with the same confident bearing as his great-grandfather. "Dr. Foster, thank you for joining us. I understand you've been researching my family history." "I've been researching a historical case of serial poisoning that happens to involve your great-grandfather," Rachel clarified, taking a seat. The senator's smile tightened slightly. "A rather serious characterization of what I understand to be ambiguous historical records." One of his attorneys interjected, "We've reviewed the materials in question and find the evidence circumstantial at best. Medical knowledge in 1913 was primitive by modern standards." "I have multiple converging lines of evidence," Rachel responded calmly. "This isn't retrospective. Interpretation, it's contemporary evidence that was simply never acted upon because your great-grandfather's victims died before they could pursue justice." The university counsel shifted uncomfortably. "The immediate issue concerns ownership of the research materials, particularly the photograph. If the donation was not properly executed—" "The photograph is secondary evidence at this point," Rachel interrupted. "I've documented my findings extensively. The original photograph's current ownership doesn't change the historical facts." As tensions escalated with the Clark family, Rachel accelerated her research timeline. Working with her 3 trusted colleagues who had independently verified her findings, she prepared a comprehensive academic paper documenting Jonathan Clark's systematic poisoning of the Reynolds family in 1913 or 1914. The paper meticulously presented the evidence, medical records showing classic arsenic poisoning symptoms in all 5 victims, Eleanor Reynolds' diary entries documenting her growing suspicions, George Reynolds' unsent letter accusing his son-in-law of murder, pharmacy records showing Jonathan Clark's access to arsenic, Michael Sullivan's sworn statement describing the poison ring, and the photographic evidence of the specialized ring itself. "This is extraordinarily thorough work," observed Dr. Keller, a forensic historian from Princeton who had reviewed the manuscript. "The convergence of evidence is compelling beyond reasonable doubt." When Rachel submitted the paper to the prestigious Journal of American Medical History, she received an immediate response from the editor-in-chief, Dr. Helen Martinez. "This is potentially groundbreaking historical research, but given the sensitivity regarding the Clark family, we're implementing extraordinary peer review protocols. 6 independent reviewers will evaluate your methodology and conclusions." Meanwhile, pressure from the Clark family intensified. The university received a formal letter from Clark, attorneys threatening legal action if Rachel's defamatory historical speculations became public. Senator Clark's presidential campaign announced a major donation to establish a new medical research center at Boston University, a transparent attempt to leverage institutional influence. Rachel's department chair called her into a private meeting. "The administration is feeling considerable pressure," Dr. Morgan explained. "They won't block your publication, but they're distancing themselves from your conclusions. You'll be on your own if legal challenges arise." "I expected as much," Rachel replied. The evidence speaks for itself. That evening, Rachel received an unexpected visitor at her apartment, Catherine Reynolds' great-grandniece, Elizabeth Reynolds, who had learned of Rachel's research through the Executor. "The Reynolds family has lived in the shadow of these deaths for generations," Elizabeth explained, bringing out a small box. "This has been passed down through the women in our family, along with warnings about the Clark connection. Inside was a small glass vial with a handwritten label, 'Catherine's medicine, do not discard.' Eleanor Reynolds had secretly preserved a sample of the tonic Jonathan Clark had administered to her. Daughter, would modern testing detect arsenic after all this time?" Elizabeth asked. "It's possible," Rachel replied, carefully examining the sealed vial. "This could be definitive physical evidence." With Elizabeth's permission, Rachel submitted the vial for toxicological analysis at an independent laboratory, avoiding university facilities that might be subject to Clark influence. 3 days later, as the final peer reviews of her paper arrived, all 6 confirming her conclusions, the laboratory results came back. The tonic contained significant concentrations of arsenic, far exceeding any medicinal purpose of the era. Rachel added this final evidence to her paper and approved the final publication, scheduled for the following week. That night, she received a phone call from an unlisted number. "Dr. Foster," Senator Clark's voice was ice cold, "I'm offering one final opportunity to reconsider your publication. Name your terms." "I don't have terms, Senator. I have evidence." "History deserves the truth." "History is written by survivors, Dr. Foster. My great-grandfather understood that." I suggest you consider what kind of history you want to be part of. The threat hung in the air as the call ended. Rachel immediately implemented her final security protocols, sending authenticated copies of all evidence, including the toxicology report, to secure locations beyond Clark reach. The truth about the poison ring was about to become public, no matter what happened next. The publication of Rachel's paper, The Poison Ring, Serial Murder and the Origins of the Clark Pharmaceutical Fortune, in the Journal of American Medical History, created an immediate sensation. Within hours, major news outlets were covering the story of how Jonathan Clark had methodically poisoned 5 members of the Reynolds family to acquire their fortune in 1913-1914, using a specialized ring to administer arsenic. The Clark family response was immediate and aggressive. Their attorneys filed defamation lawsuits against Rachel personally, the Journal, and Boston University. Senator Clark denounced the research as character assassination disguised as scholarship, and temporarily suspended his presidential campaign to fight this historical libel, but Rachel's meticulous documentation and multiple independent verifications made the evidence difficult to dismiss. When the toxicology results from Catherine Clark's preserved medicine became public, confirming lethal arsenic levels, public opinion began shifting. A week after publication, an unexpected development changed everything. The Chicago Historical Society discovered additional documents from Michael Sullivan, the pharmacy assistant who had testified against Jonathan Clark. Sullivan had written a detailed final statement before his death in 1920, expressing fear for his life and providing specific details about Jonathan Clark's poisoning methods. He had entrusted these papers to his attorney with instructions to keep them sealed until justice becomes possible. This contemporary account, combined with the toxicological evidence, created a historical case too strong to deny. Major newspapers published investigative series examining how the Clark pharmaceutical empire had been built on murder. Historical documentaries were commissioned. Senator Clark's presidential aspirations collapsed as he faced questions about his family's origins at every appearance. The lawsuits against Rachel were eventually dropped as public sentiment turned decisively against the Clark family. Clark Pharmaceuticals' stock plummeted, leading to a shareholder revolt and restructuring that removed family members from leadership positions. 6 months after her paper's publication, Rachel received the prestigious Bancroft Prize for Historical Scholarship. Her acceptance speech focused not on the Clark family's downfall, but on the historical victims whose story had finally been told. Catherine Reynolds, Clark and her family deserved justice in 1914, Rachel said. Well, while that justice came a century too late, their story reminds us that historical truth matters, not just for the past, but for the present and future. No fortune or power should exist beyond accountability, even across generations. The wedding photograph that had started Rachel's investigation now resides in the Smithsonian's collection of significant historical artifacts. Modern visitors pause to examine the image of a handsome, young pharmacist proudly displaying his wedding ring, an innocuous-seeming piece of jewelry that had dispensed death to 5 people and changed the course of a family dynasty. Next to it sits a small placard with words from Eleanor Reynolds' diary. Truth may be delayed, but it cannot be permanently denied. I write these words knowing I may not live to see justice done, but with faith that someday someone will recognize what truly happened to our family. A century later, that faith was finally rewarded. The poison ring had kept its secrets for generations, but in the end, the evidence it left behind spoke loudly enough to be heard across time, revealing that even the most carefully constructed legacy can crumble when built upon murder.